There we go. Good. I was going to say good morning because I normally do these at 10 a.m. in the morning, but it's just turned 12 in the UK anyway. So those of you that are watching now and are UK based, good afternoon to all of you guys. And I've got a fantastic guest with me today, good mate of mine, but also a fantastic author, which is what we're here to really chat about. So over to you, Chris, to do a little intro for yourself before we get started.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. Well, first off, it is morning here in Georgia. So you were right in saying good morning, at least for anybody joining from the United States. It is morning. So, Jackie, thank you so much for having me on. You are absolutely one of my favorite people, and I'm just honored to be on your show and to talk about the book. And so, for your audience that doesn't know me, my name's Chris Gillen. I wear many hats. Most recently, author. I wrote a book called The Villain Trap. It's about how leaders lose power through blame and lack of responsibility. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about. But I have been in the customer experience business for over 35 years, particularly in retail, working for companies like Target Corporation, Home Depot, Toys R Us, which was a global brand, so people will know that one. But very passionate about the customer service, very passionate about leadership. And the book, and we're going to get into this book, right, Jackie, and talk about it. But it really was a labor of love for me. 35 years I've had the privilege of leading teams all over the world, and diverse teams, and really have gotten the opportunity to help people kind of understand what happens when you don't take responsibility, right? When there's a blame issue. And I say it was 55 years in the making, but the last 4 years I really devoted a lot of time and energy to it. And my objective is to get it out there, and hopefully people read it and they kind of understand that, societally we need to change the way we think about leading and managing and just treating people in general, not to get too deep, Jackie. But again, excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
And thank you for your kind words as well, Chris. I am super excited about this. As I say, I'm going to bombard you with loads of questions.
I have plenty of time, so I'm ready.
But those of you that may be joining us right now live, do let us know in the comments. Just pop a little hello in there. Just let us know that you're here with us. And if you're watching this on recording later, then again, just pop any questions, any comments in, and either myself or Chris will get back to you later with answers to those questions. But we welcome your questions, those of you that are watching us live at any point. So I will keep an eye on the LinkedIn comments. Sometimes it doesn't show up, so LinkedIn can be a little bit fiddly like that. But if for some reason you do pop a question in and we're not responding to it, it's only because I can't see it, but I will respond to it later. But yes, we're absolutely here to talk about this wonderful book, which I've got right here, which, as you know, Chris, I took on my cruise with me recently and could not put the book down. So when, as soon as I came back and I said, look, it'd be really great to have a chat with you about this and really go into it and understand, the philosophy behind it and how it can help. Yes, leaders, and that's something I'm passionate about. I've recommended this book to everybody in my leadership academy. But it's also a self-reflection in terms of obviously personal relationships, which we'll get to later as well. But I think a good place to start with this, Chris, is for anybody sort of listening to this right now, what was your fundamental reason behind writing it? So you've said it's sort of been a 4-year sort of project, but what prompted you to think, right, I'm going to write this book?
Yeah, well, I say it's 55 years in the making, and I start the book with a very personal story, and I'm not shy about telling it because I think I don't think it's a bad story. I think it's just a tale of a cautionary tale, if you will. I grew up in a family of what I refer to as professional victims, and people are like, "Well, what exactly does that mean?" I had a dad, and I loved my dad, and he was a good man. But he was stuck in this mindset that nothing was his fault, that everybody was out to kind of get him, and he would never take responsibility for his decisions and his actions. And I watched this growing up, and I had a younger brother, 8 years behind me. And I say this again in the book that I think I would have gone down that road as well, if it wasn't for my grandfather, who was the exact opposite, right? Was a self-made man, was highly accountable, was very in tune with, we all have to live with the decisions and the actions that we take. There are consequences, right? They could be good or they could be bad. And so I kind of grew up in this house where nobody would take responsibility. And my dad being my male role model, the person I was there, it became very, very clear that he could just not get out of his own way. He had all of these dreams, all of these desires. He would talk about doing amazing things, but he could never take a step. And he could never take a step because, as I say, he was giving away his power by blaming other people, or putting the burden of responsibility on others, and seeing himself as a hero in his story, and everybody else being the villain. And I watched this actually get kind of handed down to my brother. And unfortunately, my younger brother went down that same road and developed that same mentality and that same attitude. And unfortunately, at 32, he took his own life. He gave up. And to me, that's the ultimate expression of villainization, is saying, I villainize the world to the point where there's nothing I can do about it, and I have no value. So you remove yourself from the world. And so that has stuck with me my whole entire life, and through leadership. And when I became a leader and started leading people, I started to see these similar threads in people, where they wouldn't take responsibility. They wouldn't hold themselves accountable. It was easier for them to blame and to say, it's your fault, Jackie, not mine. I'm good. And that really prompted me to start asking a lot of questions of why. Why does this happen? Why do we do it? How often do we do it? And kind of what leads to it. And in the last 4 years, I just really dug into a little bit of disciplines like psychology and other things to say, okay, so how does this happen and why? And that's the essence of the book. The book is really a framework for leaders to understand what happens when they fall into what I refer to as the villain trap, which is this conscious decision that people make instead of taking a step back and saying, what could I have done differently, or how could I have responded differently? The natural reaction is to form what I refer to as a blame bubble, and protect yourself from it and say, it's not my fault. I'm perfect, right? I do everything correctly. It can't be me. I would never do that. It's got to be you, Jackie. And oh, by the way, you're doing it on purpose, right? That's that story that gets created. So that really is the essence of the book. And I watched so many people in my leadership career kind of go down that track. Good people, super talented, all the skills in the world, but just couldn't get out of being a victim. Just would never take responsibility and accountability. And so it kind of brings us up to today. It's 35 years of leading teams and understanding how people think, and growing up in a household where I've seen the devastating consequences of what happens when people just continue to fail to take responsibility for their actions and their decisions.
And I do really appreciate and thank you for sharing your personal story at the start of the book, Chris, because when I was reading that part, early in the book, I had to sort of pause, because firstly, obviously, I can only begin to imagine the impact, of that had on you, but also there were things in there that I could reflect and relate to as well, in terms of my sort of early childhood and family situations. But also, I think sharing that personal story of yourself just helped to make the book relatable and make sense. I think without you sharing that, it's just like any other leadership book, which is just about theories, etc. But I think that's the thing that really resonated and made it such a great book, leadership book to read, because it really helped, I think, just sharing that story and helping me as well to understand where you were coming from. But you also share a little story of your own early in the book, and I want to sort of just
Sure.
we'll go back to that in terms of if you were reflecting back in your life,
Yeah.
because you describe it as stories that we tell ourselves. And is there a particular story that you can immediately think of, relate to, that you were telling yourself? And if you were going to go back in time,
Yeah.
if you could change that story, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I share a story in the book about kind of that first time I was introduced by my grandfather to this concept of what he used to like to say. Hey, if you think it's your fault, it probably is, right? And that's hard for people to hear, much less a kid, right? Who's like, it's not my fault. And that has just stuck with me my whole entire life of forcing me to kind of take a step back and saying, okay, what could I have done differently? If I fast forward, another relatable story is, I was married for 20 years to a lady who had a pretty big drug and alcohol addiction. And she too fell into the villain trap, right? The concept, it's not me, it's you, it's all these external forces that are doing it. And, and we'll get into this, I think, but when you're living in that kind of world, you end up making some decisions that you wish you could go back and say, I wish I would have done it differently. I wish I would have had more patience, right? Because I've learned what happens with people who just get into this blame bubble of it's not me, it's not my. They have to be coached out of it. They can't just be told you're being a victim. You need to own up. You need to. Matter of fact, that just drives them more into the blame bubble. You've got to be able to coach them out of it. And I look back and gosh, especially after writing this book, if I would have had some of the skills that I learned in writing this book and to going back and applying those to my professional and my personal life, I think things would have been a lot different. Right. Because there's so many things now that I understand of why this happens. Why do we go down the road? Why do we why does our ego, which is really what it is, create these stories to protect us? Right. It's a fascinating thing. And that's really what your ego is doing. Your ego is saying, Jackie, you're amazing. You are awesome. Because when we look in the mirror, that's what we want to see. We want to see a hero. We don't want to look at ourselves and go, oh, you're terrible. We want to look at ourselves going, boy, you know what? People love me. It was the old Saturday Night Live skit, people love me. Gosh darn it, I'm good looking too. I mean, that's how we want to see ourselves. So when we come across something that's counter to that, that's counter to what we think about ourselves, it's the first step of the villain trap opening up. It's called a trigger, right? It's like, wait a minute, that's not, I'm not that way, right? Like, sometimes you come across pretty aggressive. What, me? That's not me. That's that trigger, and that's the beginning of the trap. So the tools that are outlined in the book, I think once people understand those, they become, I mean, real tools in leadership and in personal relationships to help both you identify when you're about to go fall into the villain trap, but more importantly, how do you identify others who are in it, and how do you coach them out of it?
Absolutely. And as this, there were things certainly in my working environment when I was reading the book, particularly about the blame bubble, which we'll talk more about in a moment. But I've talked about on LinkedIn, a very difficult, situation for me where I had not a good relationship with my own manager. And, I've talked about it in terms of, for me, I describe it as bullying behavior. But when I was reading your book, even though it wasn't easy to do, my brain went there straight away. And I was thinking, right, okay, how much of my behavior made that situation worse? Because when somebody in my mind isn't treating me well, then my behavior, my responses, it may be perhaps I wasn't as friendly to her at times. Perhaps I then, ignored her at times because in my head, she was disrespecting me. She was, creating a horrible environment for me to work in. But it wasn't an easy thing to do, Chris. But I think until I read your book, it was all about her. She's to blame, because we do it to protect ourselves. I get that, but I couldn't help but think, actually, if I was going to go back in time, were there things about my behavior at the time that just made that situation worse and more difficult for myself? I can't say it would with any level of certainty that it would have changed her behavior, but it might have just made it a better environment for me.
You know, the one thing, Jackie, I think I've heard that's the most common feedback of people reading the book is they say it was a hard read. And I said, well, what do you mean? Because I use big print and I try to make it really. They go, no, not hard to read. It was hard because it forced me to self-reflect, just like what you said. Almost everybody who's read it has come back with an exact story just like that to say, I remember this one time, and now I'm starting to think to myself how much of my behavior contributed to that situation. And it's a terrible thing because we don't want to do it. It's so counter to everything your ego wants. Your ego wants to hug you and tell you it's going to be okay and it's not your fault and it's somebody else's fault. But where the power comes in is the ability for you to have that level of maturity to take a step back before you point fingers and before you blame and say, what could I have done differently? How could I have approached that situation differently? Because like my grandfather said, it's probably your fault, meaning you have culpability into the situation, right? And one of the things that I think is the most powerful tool that anybody can use is the quickest way, because, you know, when you have conflict and you go into conflict, I'm already thinking about all the things I'm going to tell you, Jackie, and you're already thinking about all the things you're going to tell me. You've got these great things. You do this, you do that. The first person that walks in and opens their mouth and says, hey, before we get started, Jackie, I had an opportunity to reflect on this. And let me tell you what I could have done differently. It completely disarms the other party, right? They don't know what to do. Do this. I tell all of your, anybody out there listening to this that's having a conflict, go to the conflict the next time and take this approach and say, let me tell you what I could have done differently, right? Because you take away their power, because you're giving your power away when you're coming, it's your fault, it's not me, blah, blah, blah. And the reason that somebody asked me, they said, well, what does that mean, giving your power away? Well, if you don't know what you need to change and what you could do differently, you can't grow and develop. You stay stagnant. You know, and I'm a big workout guy. I love in the gym and I love working out, right? And I tell people all the time, if you want to grow or get muscles, you have to push yourself, right? You have to force yourself to go in there and lift heavy. You're not going to get it by just going in there and doing this. And the same way, you have to exercise this kind of this muscle that you have, this ability for you to say, before I do anything, right? Because the other person is probably culpable too. I'm going to talk about what I can fix, what I could have done differently, right? But that's not how we're raised, Jackie. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but one of the examples I use in the book here is, you know, when you turn of driving age, you go to driver's education where you learn. And one of the first things they teach you, and this is getting taught to everybody, is if you're in an accident, even if it's your fault, never admit it.
Yeah.
It's true. You could be, you know, smoking a cigarette on your phone, eating a hamburger, ran somebody. Everybody saw you do it, but we tell you when you get out of the car, say, it's not my fault. It's not. We train people from the time you're little that it's better to lie, to make up a story and not take responsibility than it is to say, you know what, it was my fault. I made a conscious decision to do X and it led to this, and now I have to own the consequences. And I think that's a problem that's gotten worse since COVID. And we're continuing to see this globally. This isn't just a problem in America or the UK. This is a problem globally, where everybody else is blaming everybody else for something and nobody's taking responsibility. And that's a dangerous place for society.
It absolutely is. And even on just in a small sort of context, I can give an example of sometimes in the past, I've sent an email to somebody and they don't respond. And then you think, well, why haven't they responded to that? And suddenly, yeah, they're to blame. And it was somebody that said something to me not so long ago, actually, that made me change just a simple thing in my behavior. Because somebody said to me, have you asked them to respond to it? Have you asked them to acknowledge your email? I'm like, well, no, isn't it obvious that if I've sent an email for an acknowledgement?
But what you bring up though, Jackie, is story creation, because you send an email, you expect a response, you don't get one, and that's when the stories start to formulate. Well, they must be mad, or they're angry about it, or are you mad at me? Like, why didn't you respond? But that's what we're conditioned to do, rather than just saying, to your point, you know what? Why are they not responding? Well, let me see what I could have done differently. Maybe I need to ask them to respond in the email. That's right.
It makes a big difference. I don't know if you can help me out with the ghosting one, though. When
I will say that.
Proposal and you get nothing back. You've spent hours of your time. If you can help me with that one, that would be great.
You know what it is. I do have a theory on that, because it is an epidemic. The lack of response and follow-up, and I think that's getting worse as well. But you know what? I think what's happened, Jackie, is we have forgotten that as human beings, our goal in life should be to help other human beings. That's what we should be focused on. What we should be focused on is not me, but we. And we've just gotten to this point where it's all about me and you. I'm too busy to respond to you. I'm too busy to do this. I'm too busy to do that, versus asking yourself, how can I help this person? There's somebody on the other end of that email that is probably looking for some sort of response. So how hard is it just to say, no, thank you, or yes, or I'll get back to you? We've lost that. And it kind of goes to this whole villain trap component, because we've just started to villainize people that disagree with us, people that challenge us. I say the quickest way to lose a friend is tell them something they need to hear, but they don't want to hear. That's how you find out who your friends are. Because the minute you tell a friend, you know what, you're wrong, and let me give you this feedback, you then find out who's a real friend and who isn't. Right?
You're quite right. Yeah. It's that harder thing for us to do that self-reflection and actually take ownership of our own actions. It's also hard, as I say, to hear it as well when somebody, with good intention, and you talk about it in your book in terms of situations where leaders might be avoiding the tough conversations, where leaders might be, and I think the next example I've seen happen so many times in different organizations, where feedback is only given when something goes wrong. And therefore it's really, I talk about this all the time in terms of when that is a culture within an organization where feedback is only given when mistakes are made, where people see it as criticism.
Right.
It's harder to hear, because the person receiving that message is likely to be thinking, well, you never tell me when I do anything right.
That's right.
You don't pick up on the fact that I actually worked an extra hour last week to pick up on the workload. You didn't give me any recognition when I was actually helping another colleague, last week because they were struggling. But actually now I've done something wrong. I've turned up for work 10 minutes late, for example. That's when I get the feedback. And so I think, I've seen that certainly. I'm guessing in your working career as well, Chris, that you've seen things like that happen.
Yeah, we have, feedback has always been difficult, for people, but we have really got to a place, I think, where feedback has been villainized. And I always say feedback is a gift. I mean, anything that anybody is doing to help you get better, you should look at that as a gift. And I say it's a gift because the beauty of feedback is you can either accept it or you don't have to accept it, right? It's like you want to return it, give it back, or give it to somebody else, right? But you don't have to keep it. But when we reach a point in our professional careers where we don't like feedback, or the only feedback we want to hear is all the smushy, positive, everybody gets a trophy kind of feedback, we've stopped growing, because that is the only way you're going to grow. If you show up to work every day and either nobody gives you feedback, or when you ask, they say, yeah, you're doing fine, and they never give you any tidbits on how to get better or improve or expand your capability, you've just become stagnant. And the real danger for that right now, Jackie, is I don't think businesses, and by businesses, I mean the people in the businesses, have any idea what's coming with AI. I really don't. I still, as in somebody who is in the AI business, I see behind the scenes just how things are progressing. And what I can tell you is if workers don't figure out how to elevate their thinking, right, and how to grow and develop beyond what they're currently doing, there's going to be a lot of displacement with AI. And I know that's not a popular topic, but that's just the reality of it. We're already seeing it, and you're going to see more of it next year, especially in the call center world. And so this is a call this is why I think this book is so important for people to read it, to understand how do you grow and how do you develop. You do that by extreme ownership and accountability, by holding yourself accountable, by forcing yourself to go out and get feedback and ask for feedback and get as much of it as humanly possible, so that you can figure out how you elevate your skill set, because that's going to be the future of work. The future of work is going to be knowledge-based. It's not going to be mundane tasking, right? AI is going to take care of that. AI will do all of that for us. So, if you're the call center agent just answering the same call over and over again, you better figure out what you need to do to develop your skill beyond what you're doing, or you risk displacement.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Chris. As I say, the contact center world of the future will look very different to the contact center world when I first started my career. How might somebody know that they're in this trap? So you talk about different cues of this within your book. So, can we explore that side of things in terms of anybody watching this now? How might they recognize that they're in that trap?
Yeah. Well, I love it. So there are 5 stages to the trap. And the reason I call it a trap is because that's really what it is. You don't know, and you fall into it oftentimes, right? And then you're in it. And then once you're in it, it's hard to get out of it, right? But I mentioned, and I don't want to give away too much, because I would love for people to read the book, and it is available on Amazon or Audible if you like audiobooks. But one of the easiest way, if you can allow yourself to do it, is the first thing you're going to experience is what I refer to as the trigger. The trigger is this, and there's some great examples in the book where, Jackie, you've just spent a week developing this beautiful presentation, right, that you're going to do for your audience, and you send it to me because you want feedback. But really what you want is you just want me to go, Jackie, this is amazing. This is awesome, right? Because you're proud of it, and you should be, because you worked hard on it. But what happens is it comes to me, and then I send it back to you, and you open it up, and it's got red lines all over it and scribbled notes. The first thing that you experience is the trigger. The trigger being, that's not what I expected to get back. It's different than how I see. And that's the first thing that happens, right? And so it is somewhat easy to spot, because when you get that visceral feeling, when you get hit with the trigger, it's kind of like, whoa, right? Like, ooh, I didn't expect that, And so that's your warning sign, because from there, what happens is the ego fires up, and the ego starts whispering in your ear little things like, you worked really hard on this presentation, Jackie. You put a lot of work into it. He doesn't see the work that you've put into it. And then it goes deeper, right? Well, last month you sent him something that he didn't like. Maybe he doesn't like me, or maybe, right? And then that story begins to spin. And then eventually you've got this whole story laid out about what a terrible person I am and how I'm out to get you and all of these, because that's your ego protecting you from real, honest feedback. And so if you can identify and allow yourself to go, oh, I'm feeling a little bit of a trigger, and pull yourself back. And they say, these are the most powerful words you'll say to yourself in that moment. What else could be true? Because you're breaking that story.
That whole reframing, isn't it?
And you're just going to say to yourself, wait a minute, what else could be true? You know what? Maybe Chris is doing this because he likes it and he wants to make it even better. And there's some things in there that I didn't even think about. So I'm going to embrace those. But there's a few things in there that I don't agree with. So I'm just going to take those out. That's fine. That's how you get to that point of going, okay, well, now I can think a little bit differently about it. And when you do that, it just kind of changes your perception of those people around you, because we all do this. You do it a million times a day without thinking about it. The person that cuts you off when you're driving, right? Probably have no idea that they cut you off, but you're shaking your fist going, you did it on purpose. You know, if you're here in the mirror, I'm going to run you down, you know? But this is what we do. And so if we can force ourselves to just take a step back, ask yourself that question, okay, what could I have done differently? How could I have done something differently? It just changes your entire approach to leading or working with a boss. Said, I really encourage your audience, that next conflict with a coworker, with a boss, and you know you're going to go in and have a heated conversation, start it off by telling them what you could have done differently and watch their reaction and response. Because it really is a thing of beauty, because you just throw people off their game. They don't know how to respond to that.
You know, I think it as well, you know, you when you talk about that in your book, I think this question did pop into my mind before I came across it a little bit later in your book, and I'm guessing some of our audience might be thinking that this as well. Isn't that putting, you know, taking, I guess, the blame away from somebody else, is letting them off the hook? Is if it's about me actually, you know, going in there first with owning my part in it, isn't that letting that person off the hook? How do you respond to that, Chris?
The first thing people say, well, I'm not going to take all the responsibility for it. We're not asking you to take full responsibility. We're simply asking you to take ownership for your part, and understanding that we all, unless you're just some random victim, and there are real random victims, right? People that, you know, by no fault of their own, something bad happens to them. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people that make conscious decisions to, right? And so I think it's really important that if you can allow yourself to get to a place to understand you're not accepting all the blame. You're just accepting your portion of it. What ends up happening is it forces that person, whether they will admit it or not, to also think the same way, because you've just taken, you know, X, Y, and Z off the table, which they were going to blame you for. So what's left? Well, their part is left. Now you also put them in a position to say, what could you have done differently? Right? Because we all want to go in and convince each other that we're right and you're wrong, right? And when you take that off and you just say, this is what I could have done differently. How about you? Have you thought about maybe some things that you could have done differently? Yeah, I think good. One of my favorite stories from a leadership perspective is my leaders would hire people, and they would always come and they would always be really excited about, I've just found this great lady, Jackie. I'm so excited about hiring her, and she's going to be awesome and she's going to be great. And then 3 months later, we'd be in a meeting and they would say, you know, Jackie's she's not working out. Well, what do you mean she's not working out? She'll have been here for 3 months. Yeah, but you know, this, and this. And, you know, I think we need to put her on a performance plan or whatever. And I would never let them do that on the first try. And it frustrated the heck out of them, because my response was always this: you come back to me first and you tell me everything you have done to help Jackie be successful in the 90 days, and show me that this is what you've done, and show me where she's failing, right? Then we can have the conversation. Because all too often it's just easy to say, well, she's not working out. But as a leader, you have to own the fact that this is the person you hired. And we all don't always make the right hiring decisions, but we have to be able to be open enough to be able to say, what's my role? If you're failing, Jackie, and I'm your leader, to some degree, I own that. I have to own that, and I have to understand what I could have done differently. And then if they came back to me, which usually they would come back to me after that going, oh, she's on the right track. She's actually doing a lot better. Yeah, because you were just trying to take the easy way out of just saying, I just want to get rid of you, right?
And I think that is something I've seen happen too many times in my career, without a shadow of a doubt. You talk about sort of trap-based versus trust-based leadership. So if anybody's watching this now, are there some everyday actions, things that we can do as individuals, whether that's in the working environment or whether that's in our home life, that can help to build better trust?
Yeah. Well, and I love that because, obviously trap-based leadership is falling into the villain trap and blaming everybody and never taking accountability versus trust-based. And, all relationships, work, home, personal, are built on trust. If you don't have trust, you don't have a relationship. And I use this example, if your spouse violates your trust in some way, can you survive that? You can. Is the relationship materially altered? Sure, it is. And we underestimate the power of trust, right? Because it really is important. So then you have to ask yourself, how do I build trust? What are the things that I need to do to build trust with people? And, it's always these little things. It's consistency. One, I'm not one of these people that one day I'm up here and the next day I'm down here. I'm consistent, right? That I'm taking a step back. I'm asking questions about, let me dig deeper. I really want to genuinely know. All too often in a conflict or conversation, we stop at the parts that we don't agree with. And you've got to be able to move past that. You've got to be able to say, I'm open. And so my questions are about digging and trying to get to a place where I understand where you're coming from. I'm not letting you off the hook if I need to hold you accountable. Those are really important. You mentioned one of the big things, little things you do, like responding to an email, calling somebody back, following up on those things. Every little thing, Stephen Covey coined this phrase, and I love about emotional bank accounts, that everything that we do is like a deposit or a deduction. And so building trust is the same way. If you send me an email and I respond pretty quickly, that's usually kind of a tick in the, oh yeah, he responded pretty quickly. Or, somebody asks for something and you go beyond giving them what they need. These are little things that build trust. And those are really, really important. All too often, conflict between leaders and subordinates usually boils down to trust. Somebody doesn't trust somebody else. Like, I don't trust my leader because I don't think they're being honest, or I don't trust Jackie because I think she's lazy, right? There's this element of trust. So getting back to kind of a neutral starting point by doing these little things and just making little conscious decisions for follow-up or engagement. Little things I love. Once or twice a week, I will send random text messages to people that I just say, hey, Jackie, I was just thinking about you today. I hope you're having a great day. That's it. I don't need anything. I don't want anything from you. It's just a little reminder to do that. That's a trust building tool, right? That's a trust building technique. That's how you do that. And that's what people want. People want to surround themselves with people that they believe they can trust. So being able to build those type of trust-based relationships is a really critical skill set, not only now, but over the next 5 or 10 years, as we see the world of work change, it's going to become even more important.
And, I think particularly in the working environment, Chris, trust can take a while to build. People in your team, if you take over a team of people, you're their new leader, you're not going to get that trust instantly. It is, as you say, repetitive. It is about that consistency. Right. But trust can be broken much more quickly. Yeah. And I think that's where I think leaders and what we're talking about here in terms of taking that step back, reframing the stories we're telling ourselves, taking that ownership. And when we're coaching people, as you said earlier, taking that first step of what part we've played in it, in the situation, I think helps to develop that trust. And as you say, if you just call out somebody's behavior and you're telling them to change, that doesn't work. It never works.
It works.
The defenses come up, the boundaries come up, the arguments arise, well, that wasn't my intention. I didn't do that. I didn't mean it that way. And, before you know it, suddenly you've got this really tough conversation on your hands.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you quite rightly said, people are not expecting you to go into that conversation and lead it with owning the part that you played. And I think that for me was the sort of strongest message, I think, that was throughout your book. But it also, I said this to you before we went live today, just before I go any further, just in case anybody has put a comment on, I'm looking, but I can't see any, but my LinkedIn notifications are popping up. So my apologies if you have popped a comment or a question in there, but I will check it out later. But what I was just about to say was, not only was that message important in terms of a working environment and also in my business in terms of owning the part I play in my business relationships, but home life. Yes. And personal relationships. Yeah. And I think that's a good place to sort of, really start to finish this conversation. I could go on for forever, but I know we don't want to give too much away about your book. So I've deliberately kept some things away from the conversation. But I think a good place to end this, we all have personal relationships. Yeah. So even if somebody's watching this right now and they're thinking, that isn't as relevant to me, perhaps they're not even in employment at the moment. But this, I think, has an impact on everybody in terms of our personal relationships. And what are the key things that people can take away from this, Chris, do you think, in terms of building stronger, more trust-based relationships with our loved ones?
Yeah, there's a bonus chapter in the book called The Villain Trap at Home. And I wrote that because the book is about leaders, and not just business leaders, but community leaders, anybody that's leading. And you can argue, people leading their families at home. I think it's interesting to me because when we talk about villainizing, we villainize the people we love the most because there's a fundamental belief that they know us the best, right? They know us the best, and therefore they should know better. It's one thing if you have an employee or a boss, right, who may not know your deepest, darkest, most intimate secrets, but the people at home that we love, that we surround ourselves, do. So when there's a dust up, when there's a conflict, that villainization comes harder in my mind to those people because there's more at stake. These are the people that you love and they love you. And so it is the number one reason that I think couples argue and fight, is because they get into a place where they begin to villainize their significant other, really because that's the individual that should know me the best. And there's a couple of stories I use because I think this happens if you've ever raised teenagers or have teenagers. It's easy I used to do it with mine all the time. You see them at home and they're just sitting on the couch and you immediately start to form a story. They're lazy. They don't do this. I asked them to do this, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes a really, really difficult thing to do. But the same approach applies. There's really anything different. You can still identify that trigger when you're about to go into the villain trap at home. You can still use the ownership cycle to get out of it and to help those around you. And it does change, I think, the dynamics at home, because we should be serving each other. Your partner, you should be serving your partner. Your partner should be serving you. The objective would be to, support each other and nurture each other and love each other. And so when you can navigate these issues that inevitably happen because our ego begins to say, he doesn't listen to you. Right? We hear that all the time as men. You don't listen to me. Right? It may be true, but it's easy to go, I listen to you all the time. It's harder to say, you know what? I wasn't listening. Right? You got me. And so when you do that, when you can get to that place, especially with your partner, it changes the dynamic of the relationship. And it's not that you'll never fight. It's just that you recognize where you're going. You catch yourself before you fall in. You say, what else could be true? You de-escalate that situation by offering yourself to say, I've already thought about this, and I'm not going to tell you what you can do differently. You got to figure that out, but I'm going to tell you what I can do differently next time. Right. And that's why I think that that's a really, really important chapter of the book, because I say you can get through the first 12 chapters and go, this isn't me. I don't do that. But you're going to be hard pressed to read that last chapter and not walk away going, yeah, there's some things I need to change at home too.
You're absolutely right, Chris. I challenge anybody to read this book, and I would highly recommend this book. You know, for what you just described there, Chris, it's about true listening, isn't it? Is it not about listening with judgment? It's not about listening to somebody with ready to retaliate to it. It's about really truly listening to what that person is saying without that sort of quick, which we all do. You know, if we're all honest with ourselves, we all do it. We all try and defend ourselves. We're all there to sort of quickly, no, I don't do that. So for me, yes, you know, I've read many leadership books over my career. For me, something you said earlier, where you said somebody described it as a hard read, and you clarified what you meant by that. It's a hard read from a perspective of, it does make you take stock of yourself and your own life and your situations and our own behaviors. It's not a hard read. It's a very easy, digestible read. Some books I've read over the years, I've had to read 3 or 4 times because they're written in such a complex way. You think, I didn't quite get that the first time I read it. And that's where books, you know, I soon put it down and I get bored. For me, I did not put this book down. It's very easy to read, but it's a very thought-provoking read.
I challenge everybody, Jackie. I talk about what I refer to as the no villain's life, right? Where you've reached a point in your life where you're saying, you know what, I'm not allowing myself to be consumed by villains. I'm taking full accountability for every action and every decision that I make. And if I make a good decision, then hopefully there's good consequences. And if I make a poor one, then I have to live whatever those consequences are. So it's this movement that I'm challenging everybody to say, look, we've got to get away from this materialistic, egotistical, I'm better than you because I'm a bigger deal. And I'm, you know, you got to get rid of all that. And you got to just humble yourself and remind yourself that the key to happiness, and I've always believed this, is servant leadership, is the more people you can help. Exactly what you do every day, Jackie, helping people, coaching people, developing, nurturing people, helping people get better. That's when we all should be at our most happy, is when we're helping each other. And to do that, you have to get rid of the pride and the hubris and the ego. And we've got to get back to a place where our objective should be helping each other and taking responsibility for our role in whatever situation we're in. And that's the challenge of the book. I guarantee you, if your readers read this book, go back to work and take a few of these little tidbits and deploy them and see if things don't become different for you.
Absolutely, Chris. So it's available on Amazon. That's where I purchased it from. If people want to get in touch with you, Chris, about your book, or just to find out more about the concept or the things that you do, what's the best way that the audience can get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like you said, the book is available on Amazon and Audible. If you're into audiobooks as well, it's available there. www.thevillaintrap.com. That's my website where you can check out more about me, the book. I do a lot of keynotes and speaking workshop engagements. I love doing workshops. I have a really cool workshop I do. Some people have described it as one of the hardest things they've ever done, because it's a real challenge. We actually put people in these uncomfortable situations and force them to work through it. So yeah, visit there, check it out. And then Jackie, I can send you my email if people would like to email me directly with any questions on the book. I'll send you the email and you can share that.
Thank you, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure today to have this chat with you. It's a book that has had the biggest impact on me. I can say that without any shadow of a doubt. So for anybody that has been watching this live, my apologies if you have put any questions or any comments, but if you are watching it on a recording, do let us know your thoughts. Has it made you think about situations? Has it made you think differently? Are there some actions you're going to take away from this particular conversation? But welcome all questions as well. The recording will be available on my Turner Corner Learning Solutions LinkedIn page, and it'll be on YouTube later as well. But thank you ever so much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.